Welcome to African Tales of Wonder, where we delve into the heart of captivating stories that reflect our rich heritage. Today, we uncover a chilling tale that hides in the shadows of charm and deceit. In a once peaceful village, a prosperous beef businessman named Chike appears to provide for his community. But behind his generous facade lies a horrifying secret, one that threatens the lives of innocent children. Stay tuned as we take you on a journey filled with suspense, emotion, and the fight against darkness. Let's begin. In the quiet village of Umuda, Solomon Okafor was known as a generous man who built his wealth through hard work. His meat company, Okafor's Beef Emporium, was the pride of the village, providing jobs and quality beef that everyone enjoyed. With his wide, welcoming smile and generous donations to local schools and churches, Solomon seemed like the perfect businessman. But behind that charming facade lay a dark secret that only he and his most trusted workers knew. One evening, while attending a village celebration, Solomon's presence lit up the gathering. "Oh, Chief Solomon, thank you for your constant generosity," the village elder, Noji, said, raising his drink. Solomon smiled, his face never betraying the sinister thoughts lurking in his mind. "The village has been good to me, it's only right I give back." The villagers cheered and praised him, never suspecting the gruesome truth behind his success. Addis had been missing for 3 days. Her mother, Ezinne, searched every corner of the village, desperate for answers. The little girl, barely 8, had disappeared after going to fetch water from the river. The village gathered to help Ezinne search, but no one could find a trace of her. As the sun set on the 3rd day, a sense of hopelessness filled Ezinne's heart. "She will come back," Solomon reassured Ezinne with forced sympathy, his hand on her shoulder. "I will offer a reward for anyone who finds her." Ezinne nodded tearfully, thanking him for his kindness. Little did she know that her daughter had been taken by the very man offering comfort, and was already part of Solomon's dark business. Deep within the walls of Okafor's factory, children were held in a secret underground chamber. Their cries were muffled by the sound of machinery above. The factory workers, who were in on Solomon's scheme, turned a blind eye to the horror. The children's fate was sealed from the moment they entered the building. They would never leave, their innocence fueling Solomon's empire in the most grotesque way imaginable. "Another one came in today," one worker whispered to his colleague, nervously glancing over his shoulder. "They are getting younger." His colleague, more hardened by the years of silence, shrugged. "It's none of our business. We do what we are told, and we get paid." Solomon's empire continued to flourish, but the pressure of maintaining his facade began to weigh on him. He couldn't sleep at night without hearing the cries of the children he had taken. Every knock on the door, every unexpected visitor filled him with a deep-rooted paranoia. He began to trust fewer people, fearing that someone would discover the truth. One night, as Solomon sat alone in his grand mansion, he heard a loud bang from outside. His heart raced as he rushed to the window, only to see it was a stray dog knocking over a trash can. Still, the fear lingered. "It's only a matter of time," he muttered to himself, gripping the edge of the table. The village was beginning to buzz with rumors. Several children had gone missing over the past few months, and while the village elders tried to keep the panic down, whispers spread like wildfire. "What if there's a kidnapper in the village?" a woman at the market whispered to her neighbor. "I heard 3 children disappeared just last week." "Some people are saying it's spirits," the neighbor replied, her eyes wide. "Evil spirits who prey on the innocent." Little did they know, the evil wasn't supernatural, it was human, and it was right under their noses. One fateful night, one of Solomon's trucks transporting meat from the factory had an accident. The truck overturned on the main road, spilling its contents. Bystanders rushed to help, but when the villagers saw what was inside, horror filled the air. Among the piles of meat, a small, dismembered hand lay exposed for all to see. "What is this?" one man gasped, his face pale as he stumbled backward. This can't be real. The news quickly spread through the village like wildfire. Solomon's perfect world was about to unravel, and he knew it. The village fell into chaos. The discovery of the child's hand in the meat shipment rocked everyone to their core. Parents held their children tighter, and the once thriving village was now a ghost town. People no longer trusted one another. Solomon, always quick to act, tried to dismiss the incident as a tragic accident. It must be some kind of prank, he told the village council. Someone is trying to ruin my business. But the village wasn't buying it. Fear had already gripped their hearts, and they began questioning everything, including Solomon's innocence. The government sent an inspector, Mr. Chikere, to investigate the horrific accident. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man with a reputation for uncovering the truth. Solomon put on his best act, welcoming Mr. Chikere with open arms. "Inspector, I assure you, my business is clean." "I have nothing to hide," Solomon said, forcing a smile. Mr. Chikere nodded but remained skeptical. "We will see about that, Mr. Okafor. I've been doing this long enough to know that where there's smoke, there's fire." Ezinne had never stopped searching for her daughter, Addis. But the discovery of the hand in Solomon's meat truck shook her to her core. She began to wonder if her daughter had suffered the same fate. Desperation fueled her need for answers. One evening, she decided to confront Solomon herself. She knocked on his door, her eyes filled with determination. "Chief Solomon," she began, "I need to know the truth. Do you know what happened to my Addis?" Solomon's face remained calm, but his heart raced as he tried to suppress his guilt. As the investigation deepened, Solomon's paranoia reached new heights. He could feel the walls closing in on him, his empire teetering on the edge of collapse. Late at night, in the privacy of his office, he would pace back and forth, trying to figure out a way out of the mess he had created. "How did it come to this?" he whispered to himself, looking at the factory's ledger filled with dark secrets. Every passing day brought him closer to exposure, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the truth was revealed. Inspector Chikere wasn't one to be easily fooled. After conducting a surface-level investigation at Solomon's factory, he knew something wasn't right. The factory workers seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact and giving vague answers. Chikere was certain they were hiding something. "I need to inspect the entire facility," he declared. Solomon tried to keep his composure, knowing that the inspector was too close to discovering the horrifying truth. As Chikere toured the factory, he noticed a locked door in the basement that piqued his interest. "What's behind that door?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Solomon's heart pounded. "Oh, that's just storage," he replied, forcing a laugh. But Chikere wasn't convinced. "Open it," he demanded, his voice cold and firm. Solomon hesitated for a moment before calling one of his workers to fetch the key. He knew that if Chikere went inside, everything would be over. When the door swung open, Chikere found a large, dimly lit room filled with old equipment and rusty tools, but nothing incriminating, at least, not at first glance. Solomon breathed a silent sigh of relief. "See. Just old machinery," he said, his voice shaking slightly. Chikere stepped inside, carefully examining every corner. Something still felt off. He noticed a trapdoor under a pile of boxes and crouched down to inspect it. "What's this?" Chikere asked, his tone sharp. Solomon's smile faltered, his palms sweaty. I don't know. It's been there for years. We never use it." But the inspector wasn't buying it. He knelt down and forced the trapdoor open. A foul odor immediately filled the room. Chikere's eyes widened in horror as he shone his flashlight into the darkness below. The gruesome sight of skeletal remains and torn clothing revealed the horrifying truth. Solomon's secret was about to explode into the open. As Chikia descended into the hidden chamber, the stench became overwhelming. His flashlight illuminated the grisly scene: bones, torn fabric, and the unmistakable remains of what once were children. His stomach churned, but his resolve to expose the truth only strengthened. "My God," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "What have you done, Solomon?" Above, Solomon could feel the weight of his empire crumbling around him. He knew there was no escape now. "This was never supposed to happen," he muttered under his breath, panic creeping into his voice. Chikia emerged from the trapdoor, his face pale but determined. "You're under arrest, Solomon Okafor, for murder and the abduction of children," Chikia announced, his voice filled with cold fury. Solomon didn't resist. There was nothing left to fight for. His dark secret had been exposed. News of Solomon's arrest spread through the village like wildfire. The once admired businessman had been unmasked as a monster, and the people of Umuda were left in shock and disbelief. Mothers clutched their children tightly, horrified at the thought that the man they had trusted could commit such atrocities. "I can't believe it," one woman whispered to her neighbor. "How could he do this to us? To our children?" The village square became a gathering place for rumors, anger, and grief. Ezinne, whose daughter Adiz had disappeared, collapsed in the arms of her sister when she heard the news. "He took her. He took my baby," she sobbed uncontrollably. The villagers, once charmed by Solomon's generosity, now wanted nothing more than to see him pay for his crimes. "Justice must be served," Noji, the village elder, declared. "We will not rest until every child is accounted for." Ezinne's grief quickly turned into fury. The realization that Solomon had taken her daughter, likely killed her, and used her remains in his twisted business consumed her. She stormed to the village square, where people were gathering to discuss what had happened. Her face, once soft and kind, was now hardened with anger. "He must suffer for what he's done," she shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "He killed our children. He took them from us. We cannot let him get away with this." The crowd murmured in agreement, their anger boiling over. For years, Solomon had used his charm to cover up his heinous crimes, and now the village was determined to make him pay. The elders promised to support the investigation and ensure Solomon faced the full force of the law. But for Ezinne, no punishment seemed harsh enough for the man who had stolen her child. Locked away in the village jail, Solomon sat in silence. The weight of his crimes bore down on him, and he knew there was no escape. As the days passed, he began to crumble under the pressure. Inspector Chikia visited him, ready to hear the full confession. "Why did you do it, Solomon?" Chikia asked, his voice calm but filled with disgust. Solomon stared at the floor, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't start out this way. It was never supposed to go this far. I was desperate. The business was failing, and I needed a way to survive." He paused, his eyes hollow. "One child turned into 2, then 3. And before I knew it, I was in too deep." Chikia shook his head in disbelief. "That doesn't justify the horrors you've committed. You didn't just destroy lives, you destroyed an entire village's trust." Solomon's eyes filled with tears, but it was too late for regret. His empire of lies had collapsed, and now, justice would have its day. The days following Solomon's confession were marked by somber mourning. The village of Umuda was cloaked in grief, as the families of the missing children struggled to come to terms with the brutal reality. Funerals were held, though many bodies were never fully recovered. The villagers built a memorial in the town square to honor the innocent lives lost to Solomon's greed. Parents gathered around the memorial, lighting candles and placing flowers. Ezinne knelt by the stone with her daughter's name engraved on it, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Adiz. I failed you," she whispered, her voice broken with grief. Other parents, too, wept for their lost children, their hearts heavy with sorrow and anger. The village would never be the same again. As the village mourned, the call for justice grew louder. The villagers wanted Solomon to face the harshest punishment possible for his unspeakable crimes. "He cannot get away with this," one man shouted during a village meeting. "We must make sure he pays for every child he took from us." The elders, too, felt the weight of the village's pain and anger. They met with legal authorities to ensure that Solomon's case would be brought to trial swiftly. Inspector Chikier, now fully aware of the extent of Solomon's crimes, promised the villagers that justice would be served. "We will not let him walk free," he assured them. But as the trial date approached, tensions in the village began to rise. Solomon's trial would not only determine his fate but also the future of Umuda, a village forever scarred by his betrayal. The trial of Solomon Okafor began with intense media attention. Reporters from neighboring cities swarmed the courthouse, eager to cover the story of the wealthy businessman who had built his empire on the bodies of innocent children. Solomon sat at the defendant's table, his once proud demeanor reduced to a shadow of the man he had been. His lawyer, a man of questionable morals, tried to argue that Solomon was mentally unfit to stand trial, but the villagers weren't having it. Ezinne, along with the other parents of the missing children, attended the trial every day, their presence a constant reminder of the lives Solomon had destroyed. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including the skeletal remains found in Solomon's factory and his own chilling confession. Each new revelation brought fresh waves of horror and anger to the courtroom. The courtroom fell silent as the families of the missing children took the stand to give their testimonies. Ezinne was one of the first, her voice trembling with raw emotion as she recounted the day her daughter Adiz disappeared. "I searched everywhere for her," she sobbed, wiping away tears. "I never imagined. I never thought she would end up like this." The courtroom was heavy with grief as other parents shared their stories of heartbreak and despair. Solomon sat in silence, avoiding eye contact with the witnesses. He couldn't bear to face the families whose lives he had destroyed. Each testimony was a dagger to his conscience, but no amount of remorse could erase the horrors he had committed. As the trial continued, it became clear that Solomon's charm and wealth had fooled the entire village. But now, stripped of his facade, he was nothing more than a monster in the eyes of the community. As the prosecution rested its case, Solomon's defense team took the floor. His lawyer, a man known for defending the indefensible, stood tall and addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client may have made terrible mistakes, but he is not a cold-blooded killer," the lawyer argued, his voice smooth and persuasive. He was under immense financial pressure, and he made poor decisions out of desperation. But this is not a case of intentional murder. The jury remained unmoved. How could they show mercy to a man who had kidnapped and murdered innocent children? Solomon's lawyer continued, trying to paint a picture of a man who had lost his way, but the villagers were not swayed. They knew the truth. Solomon had not acted out of desperation, he had acted out of greed, and there was no excuse for that. As the defense rested, the courtroom braced for the final verdict. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the jury returned from their deliberations. Everyone in the village had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Solomon Okafor would finally face justice for his horrific crimes. The judge called the courtroom to order as the head juror stood and delivered the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Solomon Okafor, guilty on all counts of murder, abduction, and conspiracy." Gasps filled the room, followed by murmurs of relief. Ezinne, who had been holding her breath, let out a sob, her body trembling with a mixture of grief and vindication. Solomon's face remained expressionless as the verdict was read. There was no escaping the weight of his crimes. The judge wasted no time in sentencing Solomon to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted into tears and quiet applause. Justice had been served, but the scars left behind would last a lifetime. Even with Solomon behind bars, the village of Umuda was far from healing. The revelation of his crimes had shaken the very foundation of their community. Trust was broken, and the grief of losing so many children was overwhelming. Ezinne and the other parents struggled to find closure. Although Solomon had been punished, nothing could bring their children back. "I miss her every day," Ezinne whispered to her sister as they visited the village memorial. "I just want her to come home." The village elders held several meetings to discuss how to move forward. "We must come together," Noji, the elder, urged. "We cannot let this tragedy define us." But the wounds ran deep, and many villagers felt helpless in the face of such loss. Even the site of Solomon's once grand factory, now abandoned and silent, was a haunting reminder of the horrors that had unfolded there. The factory that once symbolized prosperity and success now stood as a monument of evil in the village. Its gates were padlocked, and its windows were boarded up, but the whispers of what had happened inside still echoed throughout Umuda. Children no longer played near the area, and even adults avoided passing by the ominous building. "That place is cursed," one villager said. "I don't even want to look at it." Despite the factory's closure, its presence cast a long shadow over the village. The elders debated whether to demolish it or leave it as a reminder of the atrocities committed. "We cannot erase the past," one elder remarked, "but we also cannot let this building stand as a symbol of our pain." As they deliberated, rumors began to swirl that strange noises could be heard coming from the factory at night. Some believed the spirits of the lost children haunted the grounds, unable to rest. One night, Ezinne had a dream that would change everything. In the dream, her daughter Addis appeared before her, wearing a white gown and smiling softly. "Mama," she whispered, "don't be sad anymore. I'm at peace now." Ezinne reached out to touch her daughter, but Addis slowly faded away, leaving only her voice behind. "Tell the others, Mama. We are free now." Ezinne awoke with tears streaming down her face. She didn't understand what the dream meant, but it filled her with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in months. The next day, she gathered the other parents in the village square and shared her dream. "Our children want us to move on," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "They want us to find peace." The parents listened in silence, and for the first time since the tragedy, they felt a glimmer of hope. Could it be possible to heal, even after such unimaginable pain? Inspired by Ezinne's dream, the village elders and parents came together to discuss how they could honor the memory of the lost children while finding a way to heal. "We cannot live in the shadow of this tragedy forever," Elder Noji said, addressing the crowd. "We must rebuild, not just our village, but our hearts." The elders proposed turning the factory grounds into a memorial park, a place where families could visit, remember their children, and find solace in the beauty of nature. Though the idea was met with some hesitation, Ezinne stood in support of it. "It won't bring them back," she acknowledged, "but it will give us a way to honor them, to show that their lives mattered." Slowly, the village began to warm up to the idea, seeing it as a way to transform their pain into something that could bring peace to the community. Work on the memorial park began, with villagers volunteering their time and labor. The factory was torn down, and in its place, a beautiful garden began to take shape. Flowers of all colors were planted, and a serene pond was added in the center, symbolizing the peaceful afterlife the children had now found. At the entrance, a stone plaque was placed, engraved with the names of every child who had been taken by Solomon's cruelty. As the park neared completion, the village gathered for a small ceremony to commemorate its opening. Ezinne, standing beside the other grieving parents, looked out at the transformed landscape and felt a sense of calm. "This is what Addis would have wanted," she whispered. Though the pain of loss would never fully fade, the village had taken a step toward healing, a step toward reclaiming the light that Solomon had stolen from them. The transformation of the factory grounds into a memorial park marked the beginning of healing for Umuda village. As the villagers gathered for the opening ceremony, there was a palpable shift in the air, one of hope rather than despair. Ezinne and the other parents, who had carried the weight of their grief for so long, stood hand in hand as the village elder spoke. Today, we honor the lives that were taken from us, but we also celebrate their memory. Let this park be a symbol of our strength, our unity, and our love. As the ceremony came to a close, Ezinne walked through the park, her heart heavy but uplifted by the beauty that surrounded her. The pond shimmered in the sunlight, and the flowers danced in the breeze. She stopped in front of the stone plaque with Adi's name carved into it and smiled through her tears. "We will never forget you," she whispered, laying a flower at the base of the plaque. Though the village had been forever changed, there was a new sense of peace growing in its heart. Solomon's life in prison was far from the grand, luxurious lifestyle he had once enjoyed. His name, once spoken with admiration and respect, was now a curse among the villagers. In prison, he was isolated, abandoned by those who once called him friend. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on his mind, and for the first time, he began to feel true remorse. In the darkness of his cell, Solomon reflected on the choices he had made, the lives he had destroyed, and the empire he had built on cruelty. One day, a letter arrived for him. It was from Ezinne, one of the mothers whose child he had taken. Her words were simple but powerful. Asterisk, "You took everything from me, but I will not let your evil control me anymore. I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine." Asterisk. Solomon read the letter over and over, each time feeling a sharp pang of guilt. He knew that forgiveness from the village was impossible, but Ezinne's letter was the closest thing he would ever get to redemption. It was a bittersweet moment, one that haunted him for the rest of his days. With the memorial park completed, the villagers of Umuda began to focus on rebuilding their community. The market, once bustling with activity but later shadowed by the tragedy, slowly regained its lively atmosphere. New shops opened, and the village square once again became a place for gathering and celebration. Though the scars of the past still lingered, the villagers were determined to move forward. Ezinne, along with other parents, started a community center in memory of the children. The center offered support to families, provided activities for children, and served as a place for healing. "We need to look after our future," Ezinne told the village council. "We must protect the children and ensure that something like this never happens again." The council agreed, and with the community center, Umuda took another step toward a brighter future. Despite the healing efforts, whispers of unease began to circulate in the village. Some claimed to have seen strange figures wandering near the site of the old factory at night. "It's the spirit of the children," an old woman said. "They can't rest." These rumors spread quickly, causing fear to bubble up once again in the hearts of the villagers. Ezinne, who had felt a sense of closure after her dream of Adi's, couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was still amiss. One evening, as she walked by the memorial park, she thought she saw a shadow dart between the trees. Her heart raced, but when she looked again, nothing was there. "It's just your imagination," she told herself, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The village elders dismissed the rumors, saying they were just a manifestation of the trauma they had all endured, but deep down, many believed that something or someone was still watching them. As the rumors about the haunting spread, tensions in the village began to rise once again. People became wary, avoiding the park after dark and whispering behind closed doors about the possibility of a curse. Even Ezinne, who had been a voice of hope, found herself questioning whether the spirits of the children were truly at rest. Could it be that there is something we haven't yet uncovered? She wondered aloud to her sister. Meanwhile, some of the villagers started to suspect that not all of Solomon's accomplices had been brought to justice. "He didn't act alone," one man muttered in the market. "Someone else must have helped him, someone who's still walking free." These suspicions reignited old fears, and soon, the once peaceful village found itself on edge once more. The villagers began watching each other closely, wondering who among them might still hold dark secrets. With the growing unease in the village, the local authorities decided to reopen the investigation into Solomon's empire. "We need to make sure we've uncovered everything," said Inspector Obi, the officer who had led Solomon's initial arrest. The villagers were both relieved and nervous. While they hoped for more closure, they feared what else might be discovered. Inspector Obi began by interviewing the former workers of Solomon's factory. Many of them had fled the village after the scandal, but a few remained, living quietly in the shadows. One by one, they were brought in for questioning. "I didn't know what he was doing," insisted Kemi, a woman who had worked in the packaging department. "I swear, I didn't know." But not everyone was so convincing. Suspicion began to grow around certain individuals who had been closer to Solomon, and soon, the investigation uncovered new evidence that pointed to a much larger conspiracy than anyone had imagined. As Inspector Obi delved deeper into the investigation, it became clear that Solomon's empire had not been a solo operation. Several individuals in the village had unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, played a role in the atrocities. One name, in particular, began to surface: Chike, Solomon's right-hand man, who had mysteriously disappeared just days before Solomon's arrest. Chike was always in the background, one former employee stated during questioning. "He kept things running smoothly, but now that I think about it, he always knew more than he let on." The more Inspector Obi investigated, the clearer it became that Chike had been the linchpin holding the operation together. While Solomon had been the face of the company, Chike had worked behind the scenes, ensuring that no one suspected the horrific deeds taking place within the factory walls. But where was he now? The search for Chike intensified, and soon, whispers about his possible return spread throughout the village. Fear crept back into the hearts of the villagers as they realized that Solomon might not have been the only monster among them. As the investigation continued, Inspector Obi received an anonymous tip that Chike had been spotted in a neighboring village. He immediately dispatched a team to follow up on the lead, but when they arrived, Chike was already gone, leaving behind only a trail of rumors. "He was here," an old woman confirmed. "I saw him in the market, but he left as soon as people started asking questions." The news sent shockwaves through Umuda. The villagers, who had begun to find some semblance of peace, were once again gripped by fear. Ezinne, who had been one of the first to speak out against Solomon, felt a familiar dread settling in her chest. "What if he comes back?" she whispered to her sister one night. "What if he's not finished with us?" The thought that Chike could be hiding somewhere close by, watching and waiting, made sleep impossible for many in the village. As the days passed, tension in Umuda reached a boiling point, and the villagers demanded answers from the authorities. With Chike on the loose, Inspector Obi's investigation turned into a manhunt. The police patrolled the village day and night, searching for any sign of him. But Chike was a master of evasion, slipping through their grasp at every turn. Meanwhile, the villagers formed their own watch groups, determined to protect their families from the threat that now loomed over them. Ezinne, who had been a pillar of strength in the face of Solomon's crimes, now felt the weight of fear pressing down on her. "We can't live like this," she told the village council. "We need to find him before he strikes again." But despite their best efforts, Chike remained elusive. Each time the authorities thought they were closing in, he vanished, leaving only fear and uncertainty in his wake. It was as though he had become a ghost, haunting the village and reminding everyone that the horrors they thought were over were far from finished. After weeks of dead ends, Inspector Obi finally received a breakthrough. One of Chike's former associates, a man named Obiora, came forward with crucial information. "I worked with him," Obiora confessed. "I helped him cover up what Solomon was doing. But I didn't know about the children until it was too late. Chike is dangerous. He'll stop at nothing to protect himself." Obiora revealed that Chike had fled to the remote mountains, hiding in an old hunting cabin that few knew existed. Armed with this new information, Inspector Obi gathered a team and prepared for the confrontation. "We'll bring him in," he assured the village council. "This ends now." The tension in the village was palpable as they awaited news of Chike's capture. For Ezinne and the other families, it was a moment of both hope and fear, hope that justice would finally be served, but fear that something could go wrong. The climb to the mountains was grueling, but Inspector Obi's team was determined. As they approached the hunting cabin, they moved cautiously, knowing Chike would not go down without a fight. The forest was eerily quiet, and the air was thick with tension. "He's here," one officer whispered, nodding toward the cabin's dimly lit window. Inspector Obi gave the signal, and his team surrounded the cabin. "Chike," Obi called out. "It's over. Come out with your hands up." For a long moment, there was no response. Then, the door creaked open, and Chike stepped into the doorway, a cold smile on his face. "You think it's over, Obi?" he sneered. "It's only just begun." Before anyone could react, Chike bolted toward the woods, disappearing into the thick trees. The chase was on, and the officers pursued him through the dense forest. Gunfire rang out as Chike fired at his pursuers, but Obi's team was relentless. They cornered him near a steep cliff, leaving him with no way out. "It's over, Chike," Obi said, stepping forward with his gun drawn. Chike, breathing heavily, looked over the edge of the cliff, then back at Obi. "You never take me alive," he snarled, before leaping off the cliff into the river below. The sound of Chike's body hitting the water echoed in the mountains, followed by an eerie silence. Inspector Obi and his team rushed to the edge of the cliff, peering down at the rushing river below. The current was strong, and Chike's body was nowhere to be seen. "Do you think he survived?" one of the officers asked, his voice tense. Obi shook his head, though he wasn't sure himself. "Even if he did, he won't get far." Back in the village, news of Chike's fall spread quickly. Some villagers were relieved, believing that the nightmare was finally over. But others, like Ezinne, felt a lingering unease. "What if he comes back?" she asked the council, her voice trembling. "What if he's still out there, waiting for the right moment?" Though Obi reassured the village that Chike was most likely dead, the unanswered question of his fate left an unsettling feeling in the air. Days turned into weeks, and still, Chike's body was never recovered. Though the authorities continued to search the river, the strong currents and rocky terrain made it nearly impossible to track him down. Some villagers took this as a sign that Chike was still alive, hiding somewhere far away, biding his time. Others, like Ezinne, found it difficult to let go of the fear that had taken root in their hearts. The village council decided to hold a meeting to discuss how they would move forward. "We cannot live in fear forever," one of the elders said. "We must rebuild our lives and trust that justice has been served." But as the villagers gathered in the council hall, a sense of unease lingered. Though Solomon and Chike were gone, the scars they had left behind were still fresh. The village of Umuda began to cautiously rebuild itself. With Solomon gone and Chike presumed dead, life seemed to be returning to some semblance of normalcy. The factory had been shut down, and the village elders, along with Inspector Obi, ensured it would never reopen. Still, there was an undeniable heaviness in the air, a collective trauma that would take time to heal. Ezinne and her sister continued their daily routines, but the shadow of what had happened lingered. "Do you think we'll ever feel safe again?" her sister asked one evening as they sat outside their home, watching the sunset. Ezinne paused, staring at the horizon. "I don't know," she admitted. "But we have to try. We can't let them take everything from us." Her words were echoed throughout the village as families sought ways to move forward, determined to reclaim the peace they once had. The village council met once more to discuss the future of Umuda. There were whispers among the villagers that the council would take drastic measures to ensure nothing like Solomon's horror would ever happen again. "We need stronger laws," one elder declared. "The trust we had in our leaders was betrayed. We must protect ourselves, no matter the cost." Discussions turned to the idea of setting up a permanent watch over the village, with volunteers guarding the borders to prevent anyone from slipping in unnoticed. Ezinne, who had been invited to the meeting for her role in exposing Solomon's crimes, listened carefully. "We need more than just walls and guards," she said, her voice steady. "We need to rebuild the trust we lost. That will take more than force, it will take time and understanding." Her words struck a chord with the council. It was decided that while new security measures would be put in place, the village would focus on healing its relationships and rebuilding trust among its people. Ezinne's role as a voice of reason began to solidify, and many in the village looked to her as a leader in the ongoing recovery. Though the village was slowly finding its way back to normal, Ezinne couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Chike's disappearance weighed heavily on her mind, and even as the village healed, she found herself plagued by nightmares. In them, she saw Chike's cold smile as he disappeared into the river, his voice echoing in her head, "It's only just begun." One night, unable to sleep, she confided in her sister. "I feel like he's still out there," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What if he's waiting? What if he's planning something worse?" Her sister tried to reassure her, but the fear was too deeply rooted. Ezinne knew she couldn't move forward until she had closure. But how could she find it when Chike's fate was still uncertain? Determined to put her fears to rest, Ezinne decided to take matters into her own hands. She began investigating on her own, asking questions, retracing Chike's steps before his fall. It was a dangerous decision, but Ezinne couldn't sit idly by while the possibility of Chike's return haunted her every waking moment. Ezinne's search for answers led her to a remote area near the river where Chike had last been seen. She spoke to an old fisherman who often walked along the riverbank, hoping he might have seen something the police had missed. "I remember the night they chased him," the fisherman said, his voice low. "The river was wild, and they say he went over the cliff, but," he paused, glancing around as though afraid someone might overhear. "What is it?" Ezinne pressed, her heart racing. The fisherman leaned in closer. "I found something washed up on the shore a few days later, a jacket. It was torn and bloody, but it belonged to him. I didn't tell the authorities because I didn't want any trouble. But I buried it, just in case." Ezinne's heart pounded in her chest as the fisherman showed her the spot where he had buried the jacket. Sure enough, it was Chike's, his name was stitched into the collar. The discovery sent a chill down Ezinne's spine. Was it proof that Chike had survived? Or was it a sign that his body had finally been claimed by the river? The questions only deepened, and Ezinne knew she had to keep digging for the truth. As Ezinne continued her investigation, she uncovered more disturbing details about Chike's past. It turned out that he had been involved in criminal activities long before he started working for Solomon. Whispers of human trafficking, black market dealings, and other unspeakable acts followed him wherever he went. He was always dangerous, one of Chike's former associates admitted when Ezinne tracked him down in a nearby town. Solomon was bad, but Chike was worse. He was the one who made it all happen. The realization sent a shiver down Ezinne's spine. Chike hadn't just been Solomon's accomplice, he had been the mastermind behind the most horrific parts of the operation. And now, with Solomon gone, there was nothing to stop him from returning to finish what he had started. Ezinne's fear grew as she pieced together the full extent of Chike's evil. He wasn't just a follower, he was a leader in his own right, a man capable of unspeakable cruelty. But Ezinne wasn't ready to give up. She knew that to truly protect her village, she had to find Chike and stop him once and for all. Ezinne's search for Chike brought her closer to danger than she had ever anticipated. She followed leads and rumors, each one taking her further away from the safety of Umuda. Eventually, her investigation led her to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of a neighboring town, a place where Chike had been known to operate his more sinister dealings. As Ezinne crept through the dark corridors of the warehouse, she felt a sense of dread settle over her. Every shadow seemed to whisper Chike's name, and the air was thick with the weight of untold horrors. She knew she was getting close, but the question lingered: was she prepared for what she would find? Suddenly, she heard a noise, a faint shuffle of footsteps behind her. Ezinne froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Had she been followed? Or worse, had Chike found her first? She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the darkness, but there was nothing there. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted. Ezinne took a deep breath and pressed forward, knowing that the final confrontation was drawing near. As Ezinne moved deeper into the warehouse, she stumbled upon a room that sent chills down her spine. The walls were lined with old photographs, pictures of children from Umuda who had disappeared over the years. Some she recognized, others were strangers. But the meaning was clear: Chike had kept a record of every child he had taken, every life he had destroyed. In the center of the room stood a large desk, covered in papers and maps. Ezinne scanned the documents, her hands trembling as she realized they were plans, blueprints for expanding the operation beyond Umuda. Chike hadn't just been working with Solomon, he had been building an empire of his own, one that stretched far beyond their village. Just as Ezinne reached for one of the papers, a voice echoed through the room. "I see you found my little collection," a cold voice said from the shadows. Ezinne's blood ran cold as she turned to see Chike step out from the darkness, his eyes glinting with malice. "You've been quite a nuisance, Ezinne. But now, it's time for this game to end." Ezinne's heart raced as she faced Chike, who stood in the dimly lit room, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "You've gone through so much trouble just to find me," he said, his voice calm yet menacing. "But what did you expect to happen once you did?" Ezinne steeled herself, refusing to back down. "You won't hurt anyone anymore, Chike. This ends here." Chike let out a low chuckle, slowly circling her. "You think you can stop me? After everything I've done? Solomon was a fool, but I've built something far more powerful than you can imagine." His voice echoed through the room, but Ezinne stood her ground. "You may have hidden your crimes for a while, but the village knows now. You're finished." "Am I?" Chike's eyes darkened as he pulled a knife from his belt. "You should have stayed out of this. Now, you'll regret it." Ezinne felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to show fear. "You underestimate me, Chike," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not alone. The village is with me, and justice will be served." Without warning, Chike lunged at Ezinne, the knife flashing in the faint light. Ezinne barely managed to dodge the first strike, adrenaline surging through her veins. She grabbed a nearby metal rod, using it to block Chike's next attack. The sound of metal clashing against metal echoed through the room as they fought. Chike was strong, but Ezinne was determined. She swung the rod, managing to knock the knife from his hand, but Chike was relentless. He charged at her again, tackling her to the ground. They struggled, rolling across the floor as Ezinne fought to free herself from his grip. "You pay for everything you've done," she yelled, kicking him off and scrambling to her feet. Breathing heavily, Chike sneered. "You're stronger than I thought, but it won't matter." He reached for a hidden weapon, but before he could strike, the door to the warehouse burst open. Inspector Obi and a group of officers rushed in, their guns drawn. "Freeze!" Obi commanded, his voice booming. Chike, cornered, hesitated for a moment before making one last desperate move. But before he could act, Obi's team tackled him to the ground, ending the fight once and for all. With Chike captured and the truth finally revealed, the village of Umuda began its path toward healing. The horrors of Solomon and Chike's empire had shaken the community to its core, but the strength and resilience of the people helped them move forward. The factory was dismantled, and memorials were held for the children who had been lost. Ezinne stood before the village, a quiet hero. Though she had never sought recognition, her bravery had saved countless lives. "We must never forget what happened," she told the villagers during a gathering. "But we must also remember that we are stronger together. We can rebuild, and we will." Inspector Obi, now a trusted ally of the village, ensured that justice was fully served. Chike faced a trial, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. He was sentenced to life in prison for his crimes, and the community began the long process of rebuilding their trust and sense of safety. As the days passed, Ezinne found peace in knowing that the village would no longer live in fear. She and her sister walked through the field one evening, the sun setting behind them. "We've been through so much," her sister said softly, "but we survived." Ezinne nodded, a sense of quiet pride settling in her chest. "Yes, we did," she replied. "And now, we move forward, together." The village of Umuda, once overshadowed by darkness, now stood in the light of a new beginning. And though the scars of the past remained, the people knew they had the strength to face whatever the future might hold. Thank you so much for watching this captivating story here on African Tales of Wonder. We hope you found inspiration and intrigue in the journey of Ezinne as she bravely confronted the darkness hidden within her village. Your support means the world to us, and we are grateful for every view, like, and comment. If you enjoyed this tale and want to hear more stories that reflect our rich heritage, please make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you find most surprising about Chike's story? Until next time, remember to keep the spirit of our tales alive. We'll see you in our next adventure.